In the first frost-locked weeks of 1732, a stack of urgent petitions reached the Habsburg Imperial Chancellery from a remote Serbian border village. The documents reported 22 unexplained deaths in barely more than a month. Each victim faded the same way, drained of strength, afflicted by crushing pressure during sleep, and struck by a pallor that no local healer recognized. The villagers rejected any notion of fever or plague. They used an older, unsettling word whispered across generations, a walker from the grave. The Empire responded by assembling a medical commission and dispatching Imperial surgeon Dr. Marco Eisenwald, escorted by soldiers carrying orders to open graves, examine remains, and restore order. The official record filed in Belgrade would later claim routine causes. It would list several soldiers as deserters. It would claim that nothing extraordinary was found. Every one of those entries is a lie that I know because I stood among the gravestones when our lanterns first flickered. My name is Adrian Weiss. I am 74 years old, living quietly in a small room above my family's workshop in Vienna. I once served as a corporal on the Serbian frontier, and in that winter, I witnessed something tall, silent, an ancient rise where the dead were meant to rest. Snow glazed the forest in a pale sheen as our column pressed deeper into the frontier. The world had narrowed to the crunch of boots through ice and the low hiss of wind moving between the black, skeletal trees. Dr. Eisenwald rode near the front, his cloak stiff with frost, one gloved hand guarding the satchel of instruments he guarded more fiercely than his own coat. The soldiers marched behind him in a loose file, lanterns swaying, their light swallowed almost instantly by the woods. I kept pace beside them, the familiar weight of my musket across my shoulder, though I felt no comfort from it. None of us did. There was something wrong in those trees, something that watched without moving. Each time the path curved, the forest seemed to draw closer, as if leaning in to overhear our footsteps. Eisenwald spoke little. When he did, his voice came clipped and cold, drifting back through the line. The reports describe a pattern, he murmured once. Not plague, not respiratory failure, pressure during the night. He paused, as though the word he wanted refused to be spoken aloud. We will examine the bodies. Facts will decide the matter. But facts felt distant out here. The closer we came to the village, the quieter the forest grew. No birds, no distant rustling, only the sound of our own approach, exposed and unwelcome. Even the lantern flames gutted whenever we passed near the old cemetery road, though there was no wind strong enough to justify it. As dusk thickened, the first rooftops of the village rose through the trees, small, dark shapes huddled in the snow, every chimney smoking as though the inhabitants feared what waited in the cold. The air tasted of burned pine and something sourer, like damp earth overturned. The men muttered among themselves. Some clutched their coats tighter. Others kept their eyes fixed on the tree line, refusing to look at the crooked gravestones just visible beyond the last houses. A few whispered that the locals had abandoned the open fields entirely, choosing instead to cluster around their fires with doors bolted tight. When we reached the village square, not a soul greeted us. Windows glowed, but no one stepped out. It was as if the place held its breath. Eisenwald dismounted, brushing frost from his beard. "They are afraid," he said quietly, more to himself than to any of us. "Afraid of what they believe walks at night." I felt the weight of the woods behind us, the silent invitation of the cemetery beyond the ridge. Something unseen shifted in the snow just out of lantern range. The village had not summoned us for medicine, but it had summoned us because something was waking. Lantern light followed us into the village like a trembling line of fire, but it did nothing to lift the heaviness in the air. The place felt sealed, as though every door and window had been nailed shut against something that still lingered just beyond the snowbanks. Smoke spilled constantly from chimneys, drifting low over the rooftops like a shroud. It was midday, yet every house kept its lanterns burning, as if the sun no longer offered comfort. Weiss stepped carefully through the narrow street, boots sinking into drifts that had gone untouched for days. No children played outside. No elders sat by doorways. Even the animals seemed absent, leaving only the faint crackle of frozen branches and the distant toll of a single bell that no one claimed to have rung. The soldiers whispered among themselves, but even their murmurs felt swallowed by the village's stillness. The first villager to appear did so only after Eisenwald announced himself 3 times. A figure peeked through a barely opened door, eyes darting past us toward the cemetery ridge. When Eisenwald asked for guidance to the headman's home, the answer came in a hushed, hurried breath. "Stay off the hill after dusk. Do not let your lamps die." Then the door shut. We made our way toward the square, or what passed for one, a patch of hardened earth ringed by houses whose windows glowed like watchful sentries. A path branched off toward the rise where the old cemetery lay. No footprints marked it. Even the wind avoided that direction, curling instead around the clustered homes as though reluctant to cross the boundary between village and dead. A shutter opened briefly. Someone inside signaled frantically for us to move away from the road leading upward. When a soldier attempted to wave, the shutter slammed before his hand lifted. Eisenwald noted everything. Lanterns lit at midday, villagers whispering instead of speaking normally, the absolute refusal to glance at the cemetery. "Fear that uniform," he murmured. Fear baked into the air. It was more than fear. Weiss felt it too. A pressure, subtle but insistent, like the weight of an unseen gaze pushing from the tree line and the hill above. The same sensation that had dogged their march now pooled in every alley and doorway. When evening approached, the headman finally emerged to meet them. Wrapped in furs, voice strained, he gestured at the sinking sun as though marking the last safe moments of day. "Once darkness settles," he warned, "no one goes outside. Not even to breathe fresh air. You'll understand soon." Behind him, every lantern in the village flared brighter, fed constantly, guarded vigilantly, and as the light dimmed, Weiss felt it again, that quiet, watching presence waiting for night to claim its ground. The interviews began before the sun had fully risen. Though dawn meant little in that village, every house still burned its lanterns as if daylight could no longer be trusted. One by one the villagers arrived at the council longhouse, summoned by the headman's insistence and sheltered by the constant glow of oil lamps. They stepped inside quickly, as though afraid something might follow them through the door. Eisenwald sat at a makeshift table, quill poised, his voice calm and clipped. I stood behind him with 2 soldiers, our breath drifting in faint ghosts of vapor. Each testimony began differently, names, ages, kin, but always spiraled back to the same terrible pattern. A woman spoke first, fingers trembling as she described waking beneath a crushing weight. She tried to breathe, but something pressed down on her chest, something she could not see. When Eisenwald asked if she suffered fever, she shook her head fiercely. "It was not sickness," she whispered. "It stood at the foot of my bed before it climbed onto me." Another man followed, nose still raw from the blood that had soaked into his pillow the previous morning. He swore he had glimpsed a shape in his doorway, a figure that seemed to stretch unnaturally tall, so tall that its head nearly brushed the beam above. A third villager described a voice, not spoken but felt, like a cold memory sliding across the mind. Others nodded when he spoke, as if this confirmed something they had all feared to admit aloud. By midday, after a dozen such accounts, the room felt colder than the snowy fields outside. Eisenwald's notes filled page after page, Yet his expression grew tighter with each identical testimony. Pressure on the chest, blood at the nose, breath stolen in the night, and always, the sense of a towering shadow standing just beyond lamplight. Between interviews, the door would creak open and a villager would slip out, clutching their lantern as though it were the only protection they had left. Those awaiting their turn huddled near the hearth, but kept glancing toward the windows, as if expecting something to press against the glass. Patterns like this don't occur by accident, Eisenwald murmured at one point, barely loud enough for me to hear. He wasn't speaking of contagion. He had stopped asking about symptoms and begun asking about graves, when they were opened last, who tended them, whether anyone had been found disturbed. The answers unsettled even him. By late afternoon the sky had darkened again, and no more villagers dared cross the square. The headman approached with a warning that nightfall approached faster than usual. We closed the interviews and prepared to return to our quarters. But as we stepped outside, I saw a woman watching us from her doorway, lantern trembling in her hands. She whispered a final detail I'd heard repeated all day. It stands where the dead sleep, and it listens when you speak of it. Her door shut, leaving only the glow of her lantern burning against the rising dark. The elder waited until the last traces of daylight slipped behind the ridge before beckoning us into his home. The interior was warm, thick with the scent of burning resin. Yet even beside the hearth he kept his cloak on and his eyes fixed on the shuttered window, as if expecting the darkness outside to press its way in. He spoke only when Eisenwald assured him the door was barred. There was a time, the elder began, voice threaded with age and dread, when this village feared nothing except winter itself. That changed the year the wanderer came. He told us of a figure who had arrived decades earlier, a stranger who crossed the frontier on foot, carrying no pack, answering no questions. The villagers watched him drift between farms and forest trails, sleeping wherever the ground was flat, avoiding others with an unsettling vigilance. Some whispered he had fled a war, others that he had survived something far worse. He died without warning, the elder said. Collapsed in the fields. No fever, no wound, just stopped. The villagers dug a grave at the cemetery's edge, but within weeks livestock weakened, children woke screaming, and adults spoke of dreams where something tall stood beside their beds. Fear spread faster than reason, so they dug him up. Eisenwald stiffened, quill hovering over his notes, but the elder did not soften the story. The body, buried for more than 2 weeks, had not stiffened. The skin remained flush, blood pooled where it should not have. Terrified, the villagers drove iron stakes through the limbs and chest, sealed the coffin with resin, and buried it again, deeper this time, with consecrated soil and stones. 4 years, the elder whispered, there was peace. His hands trembled as he gestured toward the hill beyond the square. This winter, the snow softened too early. Something shifted beneath it. The grave sank. The earth split. He drew a shaky breath, and footprints, long strides, far apart, led from the graveyard into the trees. No one in the room moved. Even the fire seemed to settle lower. The elder leaned forward, lowering his voice to a hush meant only for the living. You must understand, we do not speak its name lightly. We call it the Tall One because that is how it appears, stretching higher than any man, drifting where shadows gather longest. It listens, it follows breath, it returns to the doorways of those who deny it. He swallowed hard and finished with a final, desperate plea. Do not disturb the ground again. Whatever was bound there is unbound now, and it remembers those who stand too close. The ground cracked beneath each strike of the shovels, the frozen earth resisting us with a stubborn, metallic hardness. Breath plumed from the soldiers in thick white bursts as they heaved against the packed soil, pausing only to wipe frost from their brows or glance anxiously toward the tree line. Eisenwald stood beside me, cloak drawn tight, his gaze fixed on the half-buried markers leaning crookedly under the weight of winter. He said nothing, but the tightness in his jaw betrayed expectations he did not dare voice. The digging went slowly at first. Ice clung to the upper layers like stone, forcing the men to break through inch by inch. But as they descended, something shifted. The soil, once stiff and frozen, began to soften. A strange warmth rose through the layers, first faint, then unmistakable, as if the ground itself exhaled warm breath from below. One soldier pulled back his glove, pressed his hand to the dirt, and swore softly. "It's warm," he whispered, staring at Eisenwald as though seeking permission to be afraid. We dug faster after that, driven less by orders and more by the need to reveal whatever waited beneath. When the coffin lid finally emerged, half embedded in the steaming earth, the lantern flames fluttered as if recoiling. Eisenwald motioned for silence, knelt, and brushed away the remaining dirt. The wood was intact, but the iron nails bore faint signs of strain, as though pushed from within. When the lid creaked open, the breath left the men in a single, shuddering wave. The corpse inside did not resemble the dead we knew. The skin had not dulled or collapsed. It held a faint, unnatural flush. The muscles beneath appeared tense, almost ready to rise. When Eisenwald took the wrist between his fingers, expecting stiffness, he froze. The flesh yielded. He withdrew his hand, shaken, as a bead of dark, viscous blood welled at the corner of the corpse's mouth, fresh, unmistakable. One soldier staggered back, crossing himself despite regulations forbidding such gestures. Another swore he saw the fingers twitch, though none dared step closer to confirm it. Eisenwald forced himself to continue the examination, but even he could not mask the tremor in his voice. This body should be frozen stiff, months in the earth. He touched the chest lightly, then recoiled. There's warmth, heat, like an animal at rest. The woods around us seemed to tighten, the air thinning with each passing second. We uncovered 2 more graves before dusk forced us to stop. Each body mirrored the first, untouched by decay, warm to the touch, blood where no blood should remain. By the time we packed our tools, the soldiers avoided looking toward the cemetery hill at all. The warmth beneath the soil lingered in my palms long after the shovels fell silent. Something beneath that earth had not been sleeping. Eisenwald worked in silence, save for the faint scrape of metal instruments against wood. We had moved the first of the bodies into the longhouse, away from the biting wind, though the air inside felt no warmer for it. The corpse lay on a table reinforced with planks. Even in death it seemed to command a strange heaviness, as though the room had narrowed around it. Lanterns flickered despite the still air, shadows bending in slow, unnatural tremors along the walls. The surgeon removed his gloves with deliberate care. "The conditions are controlled," he said softly, almost to convince himself. "No outside warmth. No interference." He placed his fingers against the body's chest again. The flesh yielded. A subtle rise and fall seemed to play beneath the skin. Not a breath, but something disturbingly close. When he pressed the wrist to gauge stiffness, the hand twitched. The soldiers nearest the door jolted backward, boots scraping across the floorboards. One cursed under his breath. Another whispered a prayer he had not spoken since childhood. Eisenwald froze, every line of him taut. He lifted the arm again. The fingers spasmed. A brief, reflexive contraction, like a muscle responding to a faint current. "This is impossible," he murmured, though the tremor in his voice betrayed the truth he didn't want to face. Months underground, there should be nothing left capable of motion. Warmth radiated gently from the copse, subtle but unmistakable. Eisenwald removed a scalpel and made a small incision near the ribcage. Dark blood welled up, not the thin, coagulated residue of the dead, but thick and flowing. The sight rooted us in place. He touched the edge of the incision with the back of his tool. Heat, he whispered. Actual heat, like a living organism. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it a distant groan, wood settling, or something heavier moving through the snow. The lantern nearest the window guttered low, then flared. Eisenwald set his instruments down, breathing shallowly. "This is no normal decay," he admitted at last, his voice hollow. "Nothing in my training accounts for this." He looked to me, as though seeking confirmation that what we saw was real. I could offer none. All I felt was the pulse of warmth radiating from the copse, seeping into the air like the breath of something waiting. Another twitch ran through the fingers, small, but deliberate enough that even the bravest soldier stepped back. The elder had warned us. The villagers had whispered it. The tall one was not a story. Something beneath this roof had not finished waking. Fog crept in long before nightfall, thick and low, rolling through the village as if pawed from some hidden source beyond the ridge. It gathered first along the paths, then around the doorways, and finally around our own quarters, curling between the horses' legs and swallowing the outlines of the houses across the square. By dusk, the world had shrunk to the glow of our lanterns, and even that light seemed smothered at the edges. No guards had been posted near the cemetery. Eisenwald had ordered the soldiers to remain within sight of the longhouse after the unsettling examinations. Yet when I stepped outside to check the perimeter, I found a trail of footprints leading from the edge of the trees, looping behind the supply carts, and circling around the building before fading into the fog. They were uneven in depth, as if made by something heavy one moment and nearly weightless the next. No guard had walked there, no patrol had been assigned, and the steps were spaced too far apart to belong to anyone in our company. I brought Eisenwald out to see for himself. He crouched near the closest print and brushed the snow with a gloved hand. "Fresh," he murmured, "minutes old." A lantern flickered violently. Another dimmed and then flared as though gasping for air. The fog pressed closer, the cold carrying a faint, metallic tang. Wet earth or old blood, I could not tell. Beyond the square, shapes drifted between the tombstones on the hill. Not figures, not clearly, but impressions. Slender, upright forms appearing for a breath and then dissolving into the mist. One of the soldiers whispered that the stones themselves seemed to shift, leaning or straightening when he looked away. None of us dared test the thought. When the wind finally stayed, it did not scatter the fog. It thickened it. Our lanterns gutted in unison, shrinking to trembling pin pounds. I felt the same suffocating pressure described in the villagers' testimonies, the sensation of being watched not by eyes, but by presence alone, a stillness with intent. Eisenwald exhaled slowly. "Something is moving out there," he said, though he kept his voice low, as if sound itself might summon it. "Something following the graves we opened." A horse screamed in the distance, then fell abruptly silent. We gathered in the longhouse doorway, lanterns held close, trying to pierce the fog. But the world beyond had vanished, replaced by a shifting gray veil that swallowed sound and shape alike. The footprints had already glazed over with frost, but their direction was unmistakable. They led toward the cemetery, and in the wavering lantern glow, I saw it, just for an instant, a tall silhouette standing perfectly still among the stones, as if waiting for us to acknowledge it. Then the fog folded around the shape, and it was gone. The fog never lifted that night. It thickened instead, folding over itself until the village seemed suspended in a world made only of frost and breath. Lanterns burned low, their flames thinning as though something pressed its weight against the glass. The soldiers gathered near the longhouse, muttering uneasily, muskets held too tight, eyes fixed on the ridgeline where the cemetery lay hidden. Then the air changed, subtle at first, a draining of warmth so complete it felt as though the night exhaled straight through our bones. Frost bloomed across the metal of our weapons. Breath crystallized the moment it left our lips. Horses stamped and pulled against their tethers until one tore free and fled into the fog. No hoofbeats followed. It was simply swallowed. From the cemetery's direction came a slow, deliberate crunch of snow. We froze. A shape emerged. Tall. Impossibly tall. Its cloak merging with the fog until only the outline of a towering silhouette remained. It did not hurry. It glided, each step smooth, unbroken, as though the ground shifted to meet it. Lantern light dimmed as it passed between the gravestones, smothered to a faint orange pulse. "Hold your line," Eisenwald whispered, though his voice had shrunk to a brittle thread. The soldiers raised their muskets, but the cold deepened sharply, violently, and every weapon failed at once. Flint refused to spark. Powder clumped and froze. Metal groaned as if shrinking beneath a sudden winter far older than the season around us. The figure stopped at the edge of the square. No breath, no sound, only presence. A soldier near the front took a single step backward. The fog behind him swallowed him whole. One heartbeat, he stood with us. The next, the place he had occupied was empty, his lantern flickering alone on the snow. Someone broke and ran. Another followed. Panic lifted like a flock of startled birds, scattering our formation. Shadows darted into the tree line, our own men, vanishing without a cry, claimed by a forest that now pulsed with slow, echoing movement. The tall one shifted its head, not toward the fleeing soldiers, but toward Eisenwald, toward me. The pressure in the air grew heavier, like a hand resting on the sternum, testing its strength. Then, without warning, dawn's first pale glimmer touched the fog. The figure receded, not in haste, but in certainty, slipping back toward the cemetery as though carried by the dimming night. By the time the sun crested the ridge, nothing remained but the trail of enormous strides leading into the gravestones. Eisenwald gave the order with a hollow voice. We were breaking camp at once, and as we fled the village, the fog behind us closed like a door being gently shut. The gates of Belgrade rose from the morning mist like a fortress carved out of exhaustion. We entered as a broken line of men, fewer than those who had marched out, silent, hollowed, and carrying the weight of a night no military report would ever dare acknowledge. Eisenwald kept his head low, his satchel clutched against his chest as though the pages inside might burn him if exposed to the air. None of us spoke during the final miles. What words could we offer for those who vanished into fog without a cry? Inside the administrative hall, they separated us at once. Officers ushered Eisenwald away. Clerks took our statements in curt, suspicious tones, scratching notes only when our answers matched what they expected. When I mentioned the footprints, the fog, the warmth in the grave soil, the clerk paused, tapped his quill, and slid a new sheet across the table. State-only observable, natural details. Corporal, he instructed. Nothing speculative, nothing disorderly. By evening, the mood in the building had shifted. Whispers passed between officers like contraband. A sealed meeting convened behind a locked door, and the smell of burning parchment drifted faintly through the corridor. I glimpsed a furnace glowing in an adjoining chamber. Papers fed into it in careful, methodical handfuls. Among them were pages in Eisenwald's neat, clinical handwriting. When he emerged, his face was drained of all certainty. The findings will not be archived, he told me quietly, not as they occurred. The official record, written and signed before sunrise, contained none of what we had seen. The bodies were labeled ordinary dead, the warmth dismissed as error, the villagers' testimonies attributed to hysteria. The soldiers who vanished were marked as deserters and struck from the rolls. Even the casualties from the cemetery exhumations were reassigned to unrelated causes. A decree followed. No further inquiries. No second commission. No mention of the incident in any provincial report. The cemetery was to be left undisturbed indefinitely. By the time the ink dried, the Empire had rewritten our winter into something tidy and bloodless. Eisenwald left Belgrade a changed person, shoulders slumped beneath the verdict of silence. The other survivors scattered to new postings, none willing to meet one another's eyes. I remained long enough to receive my discharge papers, then walked out without looking back at the hole where our truth had been set alight. The Empire would bury those nights deeper than any grave. And so I carried the final, unburned account, the memory of the warmth beneath the soil, the towering figure in the fog, the names of those swallowed by the dark. For 40 years, I have kept it, and now, as the last witness, I set it down before silence claims me as well.